Before I begin, believers and non-believers, I would like to briefly warn you that I am not here to merely entertain you.
I thought you were going to be funny. Come on, be funny.
No, I'm not going to be your monkey.
I am here because I want you, both theists and atheists, to seriously reconsider your current rationale for your arguments and beliefs. And to that extent I am going to need your participation in this video, because I want to demonstrate how and why your intuition is in fierce opposition to an argument which is supposed to be founded upon common sense. I am addressing everyone with this video, so if you don't like considering alternate points of view, or you just came here to watch the flickering images and bright pretty colors, then please take this time to find something unconstructive to do with yourself. But for those of you who can suspend your convictions long enough to logically analyze an original proposal, I would like to bring up an issue that has been nagging at me for the last couple of decades. The topic of design comes up in almost every religious debate between skeptics and the faithful, but there are much more fundamental things that are wrong with the intelligent design argument that neither Christian nor atheist, scientist nor layman has yet addressed to any significant degree. My purpose in making this video is to discourage people from ever again mentioning the construction of the human body or the physical universe until they have corrected their understanding of both design and intelligence. To be sure, people have a tendency to be right when they assert that something is intelligently made or that someone has an intellect that is to be admired, but people also routinely show that they don't understand their own criteria for such phenomena, and thus they often propose arguments that are either dubious or self-refuting, and those who spend their time attacking these doomed arguments consistently miss their mark because they themselves are falling for the same fallacy. For instance, I very much disagree with Dr. Dawkins on the issue of designing the designer because his point is a complete non sequitur. He claims that the natural order of things demands that a supernatural entity be more complicated than the thing his existence is supposed to explain away. But with all due respect to the doctor, he does not seem to realize that the natural order of things does not apply to things that aren't natural. To assert to know how complex a supernatural being must be in comparison to anything else goes beyond the point at which any reasonable person can presume to know anything, even if we're merely going by the definitions of invented words. There are two fundamental problems here. First, proving intelligence does not prove omnipotence, and proving that God designed the universe does not prove that he created it. Theists usually seek to prove that there is a consciousness behind the structure of the universe, but they seldom seek to demonstrate that this consciousness is God. They simply assume that their conclusion is supposed to follow the logic of their argument. Secondly, there is a universal means by which we infer intelligence from various situations in our lives, but only in the context of religion do we completely invert that method in order to infer the opposite of what intelligence is, and then inappropriately call it intelligent anyway. Again, skeptics are guilty of this too, by entertaining the notion that design is an otherwise reasonable explanation for the existence of biological mechanisms like DNA and mitochondria. The problem is not, as atheists claim, just that it lacks evidential support, or that instances of poor design can be found, or that science provides viable alternatives to theological explanations for our origins. Of the multitudes of rebuttals that atheists commonly provide, each usually addresses only the phrasing of the original statement, and seldom the entirety of the assumptions upon which those arguments are based. People on both sides of the debate routinely treat intelligence and design as though all that were needed to prove their existence was the presence of complexity, purpose, and function, but when has this ever actually been the case? Take the following example. Your boss needs 6 shipments from 6 different vendors, each of which is waiting on their own delivery from their own respective warehouses. Your job is to retrieve the 6 shipments, but you don't know when they're going to be ready, and rather than waiting for a phone call from each vendor indicating that all deliveries are available for a single pickup, your boss wants you to repeatedly drive between all vendors until each package arrives. He suggests that you flip coins in successive tournaments of heads versus tails to decide each new destination, followed by a blind choice round robin to determine which freeway to take to get there. Now, considering the fact that this method will still work, does its complexity demonstrate more or less intelligence on the part of its designer than the previously mentioned alternative? If you think it demonstrates more intelligence, then what would have to change for you to think that it was a nonsensical plan? If less, then under what conditions would you consider it to be a good plan? Think of any of the dumb rules at your job. What do they accomplish, and do they add to or remove complexity from the workplace?
Yeah, Bill, let me ask you a real quick question here. How much time would you say you spend each week dealing with these TPS reports?
Yeah.
Think of the last time you or someone you knew asked themselves, "Why didn't I think of that?" Was the actual solution simpler or more complicated than the one you or they had expected? Was the admonishment a response to a greater or lesser understanding of the situation at hand? When someone asks you to connect the dots in casual conversation, how are you supposed to do it? When arguing with someone over the validity of a proposed explanation for a series of events, what does it mean to connect the dots, and how do you know what a reasonable explanation looks like with respect to the available facts? Let me be more specific. If you had to take a guess between the following 3 examples, which among them would you say best describe the theories of a sensible person, a batshit crazy conspiracy theorist, and your average idiot? Is a sane and intelligent person prone to overly simplistic explanations that manage to avoid all available evidence? Do they produce elaborate explanations of staggering complexity and correlate their points with either non sequiturs and non-pertinent facts, or worse, with statements which are demonstrably false? For a given set of statements that pertain to any given situation, what should a sensible explanation do? I want you to read the following quote and try to see how it relates to cosmic design. Go ahead and pause the video for as long as you need, and when you are ready I will begin the main discussion. Before I delve into the nature of intelligence, I think it is important that you understand a few key things about this topic, so I'm going to start off by relating it to physics. And just so I don't scare anyone off, I don't expect anyone to be a physics major either. But clearly, if you have a heavy object on a shelf, you know that if it falls, it is going to hit something with a large impact. Potential energy refers to the stored energy of an object, and kinetic energy refers to the energy an object has from its motion. What I want you to be aware of is that you cannot directly measure potential energy. If I told you that a ball was to be dropped a given distance, any physics enthusiast could tell you how much work the ball could do if it fell. But this is a derived value. It is calculated, not measured against a standard like distance or volume. And the reason you cannot measure its potential energy is that it is a potential. It relies on assumed conditions matching actual ones, and it relies on a foreknowledge of how those conditions relate to one another. If it weren't for scientists watching things move, we would never have been able to formulate equations to establish what a stationary object could do.
Further and further.
Yet you still closely monitor performance
We have to ensure that people are meeting their potential.
and exceeding it.
No one exceeds his potential.
If you did,
It would simply mean that we did not accurately gauge his potential in the first place.
The same is true of intelligence. The definition of intelligence is the ability to understand something, especially a situation. As a description of potentiality, we cannot measure it directly. What we measure instead is the actual understanding that occurs in a given situation, and we ascribe it to the potential to understand. This may seem like a minor point of contention, but it is important to realize that there is a distinct difference between having intelligence and demonstrating it. This is why there are limits to what can be learned from a given test, and why having a high intelligence does not guarantee that a simple concept will be understood. Further, and because we cannot measure potential directly, we can only treat people the way they behave. As much as it might disturb the scientific community, Stephen Hawking would just be another mute cripple if he couldn't get his ideas out of his head and onto a chalkboard. This often leads us to erroneous assumptions about the capacity of a person's mind, but there isn't anything else we can do about it except for advancing our methods of communication and investigation. With that said, there is a lot I could say about the human brain and how it works. I could go into detail about how our multi-strand memory system informs self-generating weight tables to determine the outcome of neuroplastic events which shape our future predilections to specific types of choices, but all of that would be rather moot in the grander scheme of things. Since the beginning of scientific investigations into the human intellect, it has become increasingly clear that the brain is responsible for the existence of our mental faculties, and as such we have come to think of the brain as a biological machine. It is for this reason that cognitive scientists and neurologists alike rightly pursue explanations for mental abilities by way of functions, because functions are best suited for describing how this machine works. But this approach would be ill-wrought when speaking of supernatural intelligences for the simple fact that we have no reason to believe that a supernatural mind would ever behave like a machine. Moreover, we've been capable of describing both our peers and our best friends as either stupid or intelligent for much longer than we've known about the importance or the function of the brain. What I intend to do then is to use the uncommon common sense to explain the necessary paradox of theism, and to explain why intelligent design is self-refuting.